peace, love, and light to all the human families of the planet Earth. I am your host, Aseer the Duke of Tears. You are now tuned in live to Super Heru Radio, along with my co-host, Melina the Empress of 10,000 Years, Saga Assad, a little more years, all of the Super Heru family throughout the whole Earth and beyond. Those on the land, those beyond the sea, we summon you in and call you out. The song you just heard was a song from our second album entitled The Soundtrack Mixtape Album CD, DS 418. The soundtrack to the book, Dark Skull 418, written by myself, drawn, conceptualized, and all of that by me. You can get the album under the name Team Cordoba on TuneCore or iTunes. And the book you can check out at www.darkskull418.com. Well, with that being said, I want to thank everybody that came out and saw us last week at the A-Fest in Houston. Everybody that came through. Everybody at the fellowship, I believe, in Houston. Big up and thank you guys for all the support. For all of the elders that came through. We also met all basically thrown by a great brother out there in Houston. Love and light to you, brother. Thanks for having us come through and do the event. It was really dope. As well as the comic book stores out there that agreed to hold the Dark Skull 418 as well. Thank you for that. As well as we met a whole group of council of Sikhs, Hindus, or Punjabi Sikhs. You know, they don't really talk to niggas, but I guess we look more Moroccan that day, being I had on the ministerial headdress with the maroon joint with the long black tassel and the jewel and the turban at the bottom with the amethyst beads and all of that around the crown area. So that was really dope. We got pictures, post up on Facebook. Anybody wants to holler at me, holler at us on Facebook. Selena and I share the page. So you just go to Aseer Ali Cordoba and check that out. But we had some very interesting things to discuss, as well as the Noble Moors that came out from Dallas. Check us. Thank you again for coming out to support the homie. So a lot of things going on. While that was going on, there was there has been a series of concentrated tornadoes that's murdering people left and right, especially these so-called storm chasers. A lot of them met their end chasing these tornadoes up in Moore. That's right, Moore, Oklahoma, which was very interesting. You got to understand how crazy it was when I came back and I turned on the TV and I saw it was like a news flash, and it was like emergency evacuation, and then it said Moore okay. So I'm doing it now. I was like, what? Emergency evacuation, but the Moors are okay. So then I went back and checked it out. I was like, okay, Oklahoma. Okay, I see what's going on. But then I did the knowledge. This is almost like the 90th anniversary of Black Wall Street. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of them people ain't been really getting right. They've been getting denied recently in the federal government from getting their so-called restitution and reparations for what happened, which was the first terrorist attack against an American government in America by the United States. The second being the bombing of the Move compound in Philadelphia by the United States. And then the third being Katrina. You know what I mean? Active or open attack and conflict against American citizens perpetrated by members of the United States, which, again, we have to make the distinction always between America and the U.S. United States citizens or citizens of the United States are not Americans. Only Americans are Americans, and only Americans are the Moorish American nationals in the true sense, because they represent the government that gave way to this government. which we showed and proved explicitly in the past 4 shows. So anybody that want to come and debate you about whatever, or if you hear anybody else that's in the mainstream so-called Moorish sphere talking elements of what we're talking about, you know where they got it from. Because our job is to bring clarity to the confused. And understandingly so, the United States, as being its own entity, corporate entity, manifested out of a 1666 statutory trust, constructive ecclesiastical trust that was then voided and then brought back into position under the so-called 14th Amendment, which is why they had the KKK dressed in the hoods, in the Moorish hood regalia of ancient Granada, because that was the Jesuit influence. All Grand Dragons are Knights Malta. You understand? The hierarchy in the whole KKK thing is basically a mirror of Moorish science, just with white folk, and they're more extreme. So in that, they basically fall under your jurisdiction as well through the Thule Society, which came out of the Black Sun Society, which came out of the Thule Society. So it's Skull and Bones, Black Sun, Thule. The Thule Society is y'all, is us. The Black Sun was created out of the Thule under the Himmler thing, and then that was translated into the Skull and Bones, which was then translated into the KKK. That's why they say that they got pictures of Prescott Bush at a lynching, because this was all Jesuit ritual, which is the ritualistically paganizing, the killing and ritual killing of the Moors. The Spanish, a.k.a. the Italians, are obsessed with that. That became part of their culture. Everything in their culture was about slaying the black penis, getting back at us for the 900 years that we went in there and did all of that to their women. But we had always been doing that. And their women was really never theirs if we're following the laws of dominion. They had no dominion of their own other than that which was gave to them in the form of a fiefdom. And as the elder was saying, the Moors are all the rulers of all ancient fiefdoms, because we were the last paradigm that inherited everybody else's culture. That's why the Moors of each position flipped in each position, meaning in each century it flipped. So once these Moors fell over here, it was only a matter of time for these other Moors would fall over there. You know what I'm saying? Because it was one grand empire that started to fracture based upon the abuse of slavery of the so-called inhuman, which was now being raised up through the system of musketeers, buccaneers, privateers, and overall pirates. So again, the constituency of our overall republic became somewhat disjointed based upon our preponderance of dealing in too much physical commerce and not enough spiritual productivity, which then forced the mass migrations of people and places during times, and then from there the Moors started to get in the bad rap of stuff. So the term Moor, because they don't want to say where the origins came from in Europe, they could trace it back to Rome, but remember Rome was just Carthage. In ancient Carthage and ancient Rome is over here. Ancient Jericho and ancient Egypt is over here. It's like everybody wants to accept the fact and write about the fact that we've been totally disjointed from our overall culture, but nobody wants to accept it that looks like us. We want to still be everything else. And bottom line is, sovereignty is not your way out. Sovereignty, especially spelled with reign, R-E-I-G-N, is totally different from what sovereignty is. S-O-V-E-R-A-I-N-I-T-Y. That's something totally different. Such as the difference between an individual, and an individuum. These factors and these sly plays in words is what distinguish and separate us and separate the brain into thinking in two different fashions, when really your brain is supposed to be unihemispherical, meaning that you will have flawless navigation. Therefore, you are always supposed to know what's going on multi-levels while you're experiencing the thing. So, in the act of eating an apple, on the physical level, you're eating the apple. On the subatomic level, you're merging with the apple. On an atomic level, you're breaking the apple down. On a subatomic level, you're merging with the apple. Then, while all that's going on a semi-conscious level, you're experiencing the apple while at the same time eating and tasting the apple. Then, on a right brain side, logically, you're grading whether or not the apple is good, how crunchy the apple is, or whether the apple was actually worth you eating and whether or not you should have eaten something else. Then on another level, you're spiritually communing with the actual fact that you're eating something natural that actually came out of something, hopefully, natural. Then, on a mathematical level, the zeros and ones inside the subatomic crystalline aspects of the apple that manifest the magnetic wave of the nutrients that come out of the apple are then also infiltrating you, which is what allows you to merge with it in the first place, because essentially it is you. Then on a certain other level, you start breaking down how many apples you had to taste good or worse than this one. And then that determines whether or not you're going to have apples in the future. All within the first bite. You haven't even finished the apple yet. So with somebody like that, somebody who's busting stuff down on that many levels, how are you going to tell them that they are their driver's license? How are you going to tell them that they are bound to this or that when the only thing that's making this thing work the way that they want it to right now is guns and bombs? But any bomb, like nuclear bomb that's dropped, is actually a huge ton of information that's being sucked from one dimension into this one. So let's believe when they dropped Nagasaki, dropped that fucker twice, they was somewhere calibrating and drawing in all of the orgone or whatever energy that they was bringing out to then help propel the rest of their technology towards the future. They'd rather you believe that the technology came from great aliens than the fact that the technology was left over from what the German Nazis had already inherited from the aspects of the old Moorish Empire that they were dealing with once they was in North Africa through Rommel, who was the basis for the character Rom, the Space Knight, in Marvel Comics. Anybody wants to get the real in-depth skinny on how comic book symmetry and sigilmancy work within the animation and the animatronics of the human psyche and the psyche of the child, you can go to my website, www.Aseer and check and get the Science of Superheroes Volume 1, 2, and 3. So essentially it boils down to us being able to challenge ourselves to move beyond what we think were capable of understanding. Because someone made law and all of this stuff so crazy and so extreme that you feel that you got to go and explore and give X amount of years to your life and then get mad years in debt, and then after you get that debt, you can see some of the wealth, but then now you're held by the secret, so then you got to put other people in jail and make money off them as carcasses, as human chattel or Negroes. 14th Amendment citizens don't have estates. Therefore, their birth certificates in terms are not connected to the ancient estates that exist here in the United States that was set up for us through the same custody trust that was set up by members of the old Albionic nobility. This means that when people get naturalized into the United States, they are becoming employees of the United States. And at the same time becoming enemies of the same United States. That's why it treats them so harshly as individual citizens, because it is declared that all of its citizens are enemies unto itself, that the only people who are not enemies of the United States are people within the United States government. Therefore, any threat, foreign or domestic, that is a threat to them, that they perceive as a threat, is then lawful for them to annex or try to destroy, based on the law of necessity that they've been operating under since March 27, 1787. When we, the several states, walked out of the so-called United States of America and General Congress assembled, after having adjourned the only and original document of freedom in the world, which was the Articles of Confederation, brought forth by our Moors of the Societas Republicae y Americanos Estados, which translates to the Al-Moroccan or the Al-Moroccanos or the Al-Moroccan or Moorish Republican State Society or Society of the States, of Moorish Estates. So either way you put it, it was all about us. And that's why we became enemies in the United States government that inherited the responsibility of looking out for us while we were going into a reorganization period, which represented the 85 years of chattel slavery that was initiated on us. Therefore, in our calendar, if 1196 BC, was our time, and in their time, the equivalent year was 1776 AD, that would then mean that the year we are in right now, based on the calculations we did in the other class, would be the year 1433. Now you got to do the announce that. When you're dealing with BC and AD, you are trained to believe BC represents thousands upon thousands of years ago, when thousands upon thousands of years ago represented your equivalent history that is running concurrent to their fictitious history that you are participating in right now. So you believe it's 2013 when it's really 1433 or 1433, based on your ancient BC or AM calendar. This due to the years of 836 BC to 1196 BC being the years of the rise of the so-called religion of Islam that led to the destruction or the fall of the overall Moorish Empire due to the overextension of themselves into barbarism. These years equivalent in Gregorian history to them was 1416 to 1776, which you could see equivalent in their history why and how things could happen. Look what happened in between all of that. The fall of Granada, the rise of Istanbul, the fall of the old French monarchy, the destruction of the Habsburg or the Hanseatic League through Napoleon, the emancipation, the usurpation of the old Moorish republics in so-called Northern Africa, right? The overall setup of the chattel system of slavery that would start by 1779. And then from there, from 1779 now to 1865, let's say the close of the so-called Civil War, we get the so-called 85 years of perpetual chattel slavery that all undeclared Moors and even some declared Moors were
were being forced into based upon them signing up to do business within the United States, i.e. abandoning their original estates within the original republic due to the intermittent conflict that had been going on for 379 years before that, with the rise of the so-called Philistine or Arab class that was then being put in charge of people based upon the first sultan being Hammurabi Bey, whom they broke his name up into three different factions, Ham being a descendant of Moor or Mu, being the original people of which he was given the divine right to manifest from based upon his appointment by Hagail, the old woman of South America, and Arabia being the so-called peninsula that this was going to happen. So these people who had for centuries been ruled under a so-called Coptic or Aksumite religion under the Abyssinians were now transferring ownership, being emancipated and transferred in ownership to this traditional, let's say, Moroccan Islamic side of things, and were given Allah as one God to worship, and made a masculine aspect of it, being that he was the masculine version of Allah, the moon god that had the most prescience based upon her association with the heavens, being that the meteorite, the same meteorite that they got in the Kaaba, which was dark black, they said a fraction of it broke off and fell into Baritania, which became Baritan, and that became, Scotland, and then that's where they got the Scone stone from. And that's the stone that they would consecrate all of the Scottish rites descending from, original Scottish rites descending from the ancient Comesian aspect, being that Scotland was an original colony set up by Sesostris II from what we now today know as Kemet over there in Africa, or in the place they call Africa. They eventually set up Scotia, and then a satellite aspect over here called Nova Scotia. Nova being Latin for new. The only people speaking Latin were the Romans, and the Romans spoke the Latin from the Moors, who traditionally were Punic. So if you overlap the ancient dominions of Carthage, the ancient dominions of Phoenicia, the ancient dominions of Numidia, the ancient dominions of Morocco, the ancient dominions of Songhai, they all overlap in the same place. Because it's one people. We went through different phases based upon where they migrated from or wound up after the initial epics and floods of Gilgamesh, that we call the floods of Noah, that also correspond to the cataclysm and a great upheaval through the Yaqub situation. Because remember, he put them on boats too, and sailed them all around Africa. And when people was dealing with the infanticide and dealing with the bestiality and the stuff that he was doing to them people, they would jump the ship and then swim to the shore, the closest coast or whatever was there. And then they would then merge with the people that was there and tell the horrors of the story, and these people would take them in. But these people were still infected with that same negativity that they, and trauma that they experienced from this man, and took that into the breeding process, and therefore still fulfilled his agenda, unbeknownst to them. And there's those of us that still participating in that same epic today. While we were out, the Queen was on the plane, got this magazine, and it was all about the new skin brightening programs that they have in putting in these creams and stuff. You got to look out for anything that says CC, color correcting. Because one quote that I read said that it removes melanin the way bleach removes a stain. This is in Red Book and Mademoiselle and all the Clinique ads and MAC. It's in everything. So all of this stuff that you women are getting, look at Batman. Look at the first Batman, when the newscasters had to stop wearing makeup and stuff like that because the combination of the makeups was actually giving them fibroids and cancers and tumors and all this type of stuff. So imagine what they're doing in real life, what this stuff is doing in real life. Then they said that there's a pill that you could take with it, where it corrects it, where it gets melanin down into the fibers and basically bleaches it out. And after a while, you'll see a gradual appearance. Look on BET. That's all you're going to see is ads for color correctors and skin brightness and relaxers and all of this other insane torture devices, self-imposed voluntary slavery torture devices that women are colonizing themselves with now to become white. Look at any celebrity, from dark celebrity, from when they start to where they are right now. You'll see the difference, because they not only are taking the actual pills, but they also using the creams that have the CC, the color corrector, which is a Nuremberg chemical, which is a derivative of bleach, and a downgraded, jellified, if you will, concentrate of Zyklon B gas. This is the shit that Pope II was peddling in Auschwitz and Dachau and these people where they was creating this crazy shit that they was going to put on you in the 90s and the 80s. And they used the woman. They colonized the woman. Look at that show Scandal. Look at all the black women who have literally whored themselves out. I've never seen it. This how ill it is. People, I get so much pissed off emails from women who have to deal with other women who are totally into that shit, and then start to pattern their life after it, the same way they did with Carrie with Sex and the City. Look what Jennifer Hudson gave up, man. You think it's every day somebody's whole family get wiped out, and the day before you on Facebook partying and all of that, talk about, wow, it's just you now, and nobody find that hard, nobody go to jail. Oh, it's just the crazy black man, right? The two black dudes, just like the two black dudes that killed Michael Jordan pops, right? Oh, word. Okay. Just like the black dude that allegedly stole a woman's car and the baby, and it turns out the woman drowned the babies and all that in the lake, blamed it on a black man. That she had seen earlier and was attracted to, she said. You think this is normal? You think this is what it means? This is what it means to be a citizen of the United States, y'all. This is what Thurgood Marshall fought for. He fought for your right to be able to be falsely educated and totally dependent on a system that is set up to kill you based upon the nihilistic, satanic worldview of people who know who and what you really are, because they descend from that core group who really inherited the debt, the white man's burden of holding on to the bonds and the estates of this country when they know that it's not that. That's why when the prophet came, they were so crazy. That's why they had to give you Martin Luther King and everybody else. They'll give you 15 Martin. They'll give you 15 Malcolm X days. They'll give you 28 Martin Luther King statues if you want. Ask for one Noble Joe Ali statue and see what they give you as a United States citizen. Let's see what they give. I ain't gonna do that. The Moors ain't even created a situation where the prophet tomb is like a mausoleum. That shit needs to be like you going to Mecca when you go to that shit, man. Don't let me get money. Don't let me get money and be able to do some shit like that for the man. Are you crazy? We should have been and done that. That's how they know they can still fuck with us, because we not thinking about the big picture, because your representatives, again, the Negro leaders that's paid off with a small fortune in white women, and these niggas is the ones pouting black power like they pout Christianity. It ain't no different, man. You could show me 10 million artifacts from over there in Africa, man. You could show me all of that, and I would be greatly appreciative. And I would be humbled to be able to see what our ancestors accomplished. But by no means makes me feel any way inferior or indebted any more to them over there than the ones over here, whom I have nativity with, who I just happen to figure out were our Moroccans or Moors or Moorish Muslim or Musulman. The real ones. The ones who know the difference between the country and the empire. These are the things that are looked to for those who find or want to find themselves worthy of really bringing us out of the position. It's not about how much we know. It's about what we know and what we know how to do with what we know. If we don't know anything else, then we are in a position where we are always going to be at the will of somebody explaining to us how it's done. We got to have a position that allows us the time to nurture a full generation that doesn't have the negative influence of the United States as a gargoyle on its apartment building. You know what I'm saying? We have to find another avenue to educate our children, because the current state as it stands is there to fill up the prisons, which again is a private monopoly. Therefore, anybody could get in the game. What if there was really a prison dedicated to rehabilitation? For niggas to work out their homosexuality, work out their rage, work out their issues. And even if they never release, they in a position where they not reduced to barbarism and animalism. And they find some way to restitute whatever was done or whatever they did. Yaqub did not build prison houses for his people. You know what I'm saying? You didn't do what he said, that was it. And then they fed you to the wild beast or the cremator. You know what I'm saying? That was it. There was no talking about nothing. That's why his society worked. That's why they work. That's why evil works, because it's organized. It has a function. It knows what it wants to do, and it does it. It doesn't have any moral qualms. It doesn't care about God or anything like that. Evil doesn't care about that. Evil cares about evil. Therefore, evil is then an aspect of the ego. And the ego will do anything to save itself. I'm a man. I know. Sometimes I'd rather be anything than wrong. You know what I'm saying? This is real talk, man. Because men strive on approval on some basic level. They don't care about cars and all of that. Real men don't care about that stuff. A real man is like 2 cars that you really like. Anything other than that is just like, you bugging. That's just excess, man. You know what I mean? And usually it'd be like your whip and then like your queen whip. You know what I'm saying? Anything other than that, when you got 5 and 10 and 15 cars, who's driving all of that? What, they just gonna sit there? You just bring people by to look at them? Like, that shit is European. You see what I'm saying? That's European. An American want to go. An American want to get in the car and go. Like, what you leaving? You got this shit locked up, nigga? Where the keys? Let's go. Nah, I just want to floss. That's some European shit. That's that pomp and circumstance, petticoat. I wear lace around my gloves. You know what I'm saying? I dip snuff and then, challenge you to a duel. You know what I'm saying? And all of that. We, a long time ago, literally buried the hatchet in the story, in the ancient story and legend of the Haudenosaunee, or the Haudenosaunee, who are the Iroquois, our government, through Degandawada and Hiawatha. We literally buried it. That's why we were so peaceful for so many centuries, the millennia over here. But that switched when the French and the Spanish came. The British came, they was going to rock in their little place until they slaves wanted to have their own say. And we've been paying ever since. So the modern-day system of slavery or 14th Amendment citizenship or U.S. naturalization is actually a form of denationalization and a state grabbing by the so-called State Department. As an emissary, I can tell you this because I'm not under the obligation or pain of death of any so-called secret society. Yet, based upon my position, they are obligated to protect me and anybody else that's really building on the truth like this because they know what they are there to do and what their kingdom and where their dominion ends and lies. And that's for all people who are generals in the field. A general is not about giving people orders. That's not what a general do. Niggas act like they ready for war, all this, and they don't understand war at all. They think it's literally about killing people. That's the last stage. By the time they start killing people, they done lined up so much money for them to get off them people's estates. It's incredible. All these estates. Think about all the men that died in Normandy. Go to Arlington Cemetery and drive by it one time. That's like driving by Hiroshima. You be driving by that shit for like an hour. Each one of them crosses represent an estate that's owned now or put in trust by the United States. And then you ask where the money coming from. That man ain't coming back to see where his money is. He ain't coming back to check his account. This shit is just not checkers, man. They got you looking for the forest, for the trees. They got you thinking that being a part of something and voting within something is going to give you the respect that it takes for you to reestablish yourself or seen somehow outside of it. How are you going to create a party of people to vote who are electors, who are descended from the electors, the planters, the constitutors? How you going to get them to vote? And if you do, that means they've abandoned their state. They've come out of their position to now afford themselves the right and privilege to vote under a fiction. You don't get out of a Bentley and get into a Mazda hatchback, nigga. You don't do that. If you don't have to. You don't do that. You don't. You know what I'm saying? You don't do things like that if you got good sense. Now we know it is crazy. By it, I mean the actual, what we perceive as the devil or the grafted-made devil, or anyone prescribing to that ideal, which fundamentalists will refer to as the Great Satan, which is so-called United States, which is right but not exact, meaning that the United States was not initially founded for that. People like John Adams said, do not go seeking monsters abroad to create wars of fortune. You're not supposed to be doing all that. This was the place that was set aside for true law and justice. A whole hemisphere, which, if you could look at it like a preserve for real culture, ancient culture, going back to, like I said before, Atlantis and all of that, for whatever reason. And that now was being usurped and put in a simply monetary fashion. How much gold can we get out of this place? How many temples can we turn into churches to keep the Moors from their true position in the world? We got them in Granada. Now we use the broken of them to bring us over here. And now that we're over here, we're going to actually merge into the royal bloodline. That's what the Spanish would do. The British would learn the customs and all of that, and then eventually use that to hook up with a disgruntled heir, and then use his position to then take over. The Spanish would try to merge into the bloodline. as well as the Germans. It just so happens that this happened through Carlos Quint, who was also Charles V, founder of North and South Carolina, who at the time was Carolina, of the Carolingian dynasty that was part Moorish due to the connection of the Moravians, or the Moravians, who were basically ancient Franks who descended from the original agreement between Charlemagne and Jabbar al-Tariq, or whoever was in charge at the time, at the close of the Battle of Tours. So as an emissary, I'm telling you that your history is positioned in every monarchy in the planet and was usurped around the same time due to the usurpation of the ancient Moors being recognized as landowners by the proxied Freemasons, who were now being propped up by these black nobility families that were now in the process of bleaching themselves out to now use the white substance to further get rid of the Moorish dominance with the help of the so-called Vaticanized Catholic Church that was already in the business of breaking Moors and creating situations. The only reason why you send your children to Catholic school today, or why I was sent to a Lutheran school back in the day, was because of a Moorish edict in 1493 that said all Moorish children had to go to Catholic schools for proper Catholic education. Now, Moors had to leave their doors open to allow the inquisitors to come in and make sure they wasn't teaching their children Moorish science. Ain't that what is that? Bureau for Child Services do right now? They're trying to break into the estate through the father, keep kicking the father out because he's the one that's really holding the barn. That's why they go to him for the money. And they use the woman as the dock or the vessel to get it, and the child as the ransom. The woman, out of the scorn for the father, is put up the child as a ward, which then allows her benefits, which is police protection, because she is a valued asset, a preferred stock to access the mortgage-backed security, which is the father. So the state or the judge can act as the trustor, and you act as the trustee of your name, her name, and the baby's name. And she becomes a willing participant in that due to the first lie she tells within that, because then that allows her to become complicit spiritually to the act of the destruction of the family. This is what the black woman fought for during the 60s in what became the rise of black feminism, which was really a mask for black lesbianism, which is why the virile hatred and the insanity of men who would try to put women through sexual hazing rituals only amplified the so-called camaraderie of the white woman with this so-called black woman revolutionary that was now tired of being turned out by her black revolutionary man that was always in jail. So now she could go fight for her and for her rights to go to work and then have her child looked after like the white woman. But the white woman didn't tell her that when you do that, you are actually going to be working for me and your child, and you're going to be raising my child while I'm out doing my thing, and then your child is going to be at home under the services of the state. That's why Gloria Steinem is married and has retracted everything she's done to the point she is the stepmother of Batman, this nigga Christian Bale. And said that she don't know that whole shit was CIA co-opted and they flipped it all on her. And now she got it, she don't believe in none of that feminist shit because that shit was about destroying women and specifically black women and their families. You think that's stopping Halle Berry from having these white people's babies? Thinking that's stopping Reggie Bush or any one of these other niggas from having these people babies?
See, there's a science to birth, and they're not telling you. And again, as your brother, and because we are the descendants of these great people, it is our obligation to commune on aspects of that lend to why these things have not been shared. Because, see, once you hear what it is, then you understand who's not saying what. Without me having to say nothing. If you got ears to hear and eyes to see, because it's not about being negative or coming out against people or saying what people ain't doing or how niggas is trying to get money off niggas. We already know that that's what's going on. There's a whole market for fake nationality. You know what I'm saying? Like, these niggas done marketed it where niggas is talking about it like it's like civil rights. Niggas got it down to it like that. And these are people that's supposed to know better, you know what I'm saying? These are people that's supposed to be really, bringing you the cutting edge of what it is. But they can't really do that because a lot of them is under oath and have done things to ally themselves with the other side. Why not? While still trying to appear to you as something else. Yet, the only reason why we can explain that is because this is what the cycle has always been and has continued to be since our fall from one another and our inability to commune at a level of equality where we can absolve ourselves from any so-called spiritual obligation or debt that we may not understand is that in this life. Like, you got people that just don't like you. You got people who start liking you and then they just end up liking you and then don't know why. And then that makes them feel bad about themselves. So then they start feeling worse around you because you're not caught up in that. You know what I'm saying? And if you're really on point, you're not really letting on that you know anyway. You know what I'm saying? You're letting them deal with their own inadequacy. And in the process of that, that's allowing somebody to really be an adult and learn a lesson themselves. Most people is not that generous with wisdom. You dig? They just want mucho money for that. When the only money that can be given should be given as a zakat to be able to continue to work. You know what I'm saying? But again, that's just my opinion of what it should be based on me or me striving to represent a position. You see? Yet my position can't always be right. It can only be right based upon my intent of what I'm doing in knowledge. Therefore, if your intent is to convey the knowledge at the best of your ability, then that will always be the effect of that knowledge. You see what I'm saying? If the intent of the knowledge is to have a new way to get people to give money, you see, then that will be the outcome of that. But that is not the intent of what the prophet did. Like, niggas say what they want about the prophet, but he the only one that seemed like he established in the state for people. He didn't even know. That wasn't even born yet. An earthly one that you can annex to the one that exists for you under your original name on your birth certificate. Which is why niggas want you to change that. You could be called whatever you want on your Morris documents or whatever else. But when it comes to you being a part of or established with a universal trust, then that should be established to the one that already exists for you. That nigga's been telling you for how many years is a slave name, whatever that means. Do they mean it's a name of bondage? Do they mean it's a Slovakian name? Do they believe it's a German name? And what does that mean? A slave name, a government name. Your government name means that's the name that's registered with your government, right? Right? It just so happens that your government is the one with the pyramid on it and is functioning for you right now. That got a constitution with it and everything. That work in harmony with the one you already got, that the prophet already left for you on earth. So, because I say I'm a Moor, I'm somehow a problem, I'm somehow not real. The royal secret is Hiram Abyss is a star, the resurrected. Both are symbols of the mortgage, meaning the dead pledge. The Moors are the true inheritors of Amarak, meaning America, which is a combination of a Mexim and Africa. The AME from a Mexim and the RICK from Africa. Their estates were abandoned and put beyond the sea, under the jurisdiction of the Vatican Holy See, the Admiralty, because they were absent of themselves, i.e. denationalized. So the black man is a Negroized Moroccan. The 33 of the so-called Freemasons represents the royal secret. The 33 represents the 33 lumbar of the spine that was broken in half to create the Negro, to make him bend to the knee, or grow only to the knee, at 33% of the human capacity. So that only growth takes place is to the knee, hence the Negro. Then taken into false subjugation by their former slaves, emancipated, orchestrated by our cousins from Al Europa, who were in the process of the practice of taking over by proxy, meaning propping up what's called a lord of misrule, or a sissy prince, or a puppet king, and then rule from behind. But then it got flipped on them. These three people in history were called, in Masonry, they're called the three Jews: Jubilo, Jubilam, and Jubilah. Jubilam is Britain, Jubilah is France, Jubilo is Spain, along with all of the Moors of the Old York who became brothers of the foreign Moors and their slaves, meaning those Moors from here that hooked up with them through the Barbary pirate thing to get money. They were then reorganized under the name Prince Hall, meaning the princely hall, the princely halls, the princely corridors. They were princes who were going to be portals for the G7 Lodge from London to establish a native jurisdiction in Amarak called America. And then they were able to establish the pseudo-jurisdiction of the so-called Masonic Grand Lodge. Only the high Scottish Rite Grand Dragons know that, if they know that at all. I'm telling it to you for free. Because it's a story in the end. It's a story about what happened. And they ritualized this story into pageantry. And because the costumes were familiar to you, you participated with them in that. Not knowing the pageantry was a funeral rite of the custodians of who and what you really are, who can never be more. They have done their best to erase you from history. You understand? From history. Well, if you say you are more today or you dress a Moorish habit today based upon your temperament, you may not be received well. But my temperament is such that I don't care. If people have had bad experiences with Moors or not, I'm not a citizen of the United States. I look beyond the geographic location I'm at. So just because these Moors that you messed with was bad, don't bring that shit of them niggas over here to me, because they wasn't me. They don't roll and function how I function. I don't have them problems that they're going to have. And this is the
finality that you, what I'm understanding is that you got to have being able to really live this. I am not doing nothing wrong by exercising my religious right that happens to be tied up to a national identity. That's not my fault. I didn't create the Moorish Science Temple. I didn't create Moors. It does. I didn't create Moors. I didn't create Moorish Science Temple. I didn't create Moorally. I didn't forge the documents that he went and spoke to the head of the president of the time, and Grand Sheikh F. Turner Hill was doing the same thing and all. I didn't do it. I'm sorry. That existed before I lived. But guess what? I'm the inheritor of all of that. That's my lineage. That's my inheritance. That's my lineage, inheritance, my birthright, and my trust. So if you try to move against me, you're moving against an estate that's tied up to the original estate of the original Confederation of States, the several states that represent my several Circle 7 Quran, that represent the 48 states of the historic flag of the United States. There's nobody more American than a Moor. Don't believe me? Read what J. Edgar Hoover wrote. He said Moors are the most patriotic and American of all Americans. Of all, this is J. Edgar Hoover. This is the nigga who was a nigga who hated niggas. He hated being a nigga. But he respected his Moorish heritage. Ain't that a blip? So yeah, okay, he dressed up in a dress too. There's a lot of Moors today that's doing stuff like that. That don't have nothing to do with whether or not they know when I say what's Title 18 USC, whether or not they can help me out of the situation. I don't give a damn who you sleeping with. When you around me, when we in session, are you in your proper person? Great. That's all I care about, man. I'm not here to judge you what you're doing. That's between you and the great God Allah. That has nothing to do with me, male or female. I don't care. You understand? I only care when it's used as a military agenda to retard the natural process of a child or a woman or a man to discover what their own sexuality or whatever it is they want it to be in this physical incarnation. That's my opinion of it. You dig? My problem be the niggas who's holier than thou and acting like they all into all of this and all of that, and the manly man, but then they only going into situations where men are building. Whenever there's situations where there's only women, where there's only men, in 2013, which is 1433, you got to be careful. This is a time when Osar and Aset is supposed to sit on the throne together to bring forth Harpaprat and Heru. That's where we in. I'm sorry. So because that's what it is, they're bombarding you with the anti-version of that, the same-sex version of that. We are everything. Therefore, we have a God-given perspective that allows us to identify with everyone on the planet. Ain't nobody else doing that but you. Therefore, under federal regulation, you can also be registered as a non-person. You dig? Because that allows them to know that's basically a Moor. That's somebody that is in a position who has had their history basically whitewashed. Person, again, is corporation. Yet impropriety persona, that's something else. You are litigious by nature. You don't know how to politic by nature. It's just when you get in courtrooms and stuff like that, they position themselves as the trustor over you. That's why establishing yourself as the head of your estate allows you to position yourself in a better position to then establish the trust on earth as it is in heaven, so that way you can draw money from it and do things you're supposed to do. Because by definition, you are you're not making money. Everything you're doing is for the state, the estate. Therefore, everything you receive is donation and zakat. That's how it's supposed to be. That's how we were able to uphold everything. We, as Moors, fall under customary law. Article 6 of the Treaty of Tripoli says, as the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. This is from the United States side saying this. As the government of the United States of America is not in any way founded on the Christian religion, as it has in itself no character of enmity against the laws, religion, or tranquility of Muslims, Moors, or Mohammedans, and as the said estates have never entered into any war or act of hostility against any Mohammedan nation. It is declared by the parties that no pretext arising from religious opinion shall ever produce an interruption of harmony existing between the two countries. You were a day of Tripoli, a ill of Tangier. That's a treaty with you. Not just the physical geographic state of what existed then. You fall under customary law. This is a customary law that was passed down from generation to generation. Therefore, it's already written that the United States was not founded, to the point that the more email me the joint that the atheists put this on the front of their document, they building or whatever, saying that the United States was not in any form founded on the Christian religion. They're using a Moorish quote from that to clarify their position. You think black Christian preachers, going to tell you anything about nationality? Never. Because Christianity is a form of indentured servitude. It always has been. It's an Indianity based on Christ. It lacks substance. Therefore, the United States has always understood its relationship with Moors. Therefore, when it's doing the things that it's doing to Moors, it, in its own way, is trying to uphold an aspect of the original treaties, of which the trademarks of who Moors are, because trademarks didn't exist in the Moorish dominions, remember? It wasn't like in Moorish dominions they was calling themselves Negroes. No. People who was doing that was being ostracized from those original dominions because they was bringing the confusion that was breaking down the rest of the empire. But our country, which was now formulating itself as a confederation through the Articles of Association, allowed the true strongholds and the true remnants of the original government, which was the Societas Republicae y Americanos Estados, which gave forth to the United States of America in General Congress Assembled, which then created the Continental Congress, which was analogous and was, in fact, the Iroquois Confederacy, as well as the Union of the Six Nations that preceded it. So we got the Societas Republicae Americanos Estados, then we have the Iroquois Confederacy, we have the Union of the Six Nations, then we have the Iroquois Confederacy, then we have the Articles of Confederation, then we have the United States of America and General Congress Assembled, then inside of that we have the United States federal government created to monitor and provide for those who were the descendants of the Providence and the Halifax plantations, who in 1677 Moorish militiamen traveled up and down the East Coast in what's called now New England, putting them back into bondage because they was trying to escape the slave pens and all of that we had them in. Meanwhile, down south, the indentured servitude of these Moors that were now being put under the proxy rulership of these freed and accepted Masons, who are now merging with the so-called Octoroon and so-called National French class that were now connected to Louis and Anna Maria, which brought the Washita into it. But because she had married into a foreign dominion, her and her lands now fell under the jurisdiction of the Corsican, Napoleon, who were indeed descended from Hannibal, being that Corsica was part of the Carthaginian Empire back in the days, but during the time period, he was one of these Moors that was trying to break up the Hanseatic League, which is the Habsburg dynasty and empire, that he couldn't marry into or tried to marry into a Josephine, but because she was a direct descendant from Charlotte, the Moor, they was trying to bleach. So, they went the opposite way. So he got mad and then used his political situation to fund what eventually became the expedition into Egypt, where he then merged aspects of his noble class with the Mamluk noble class of white slaves who were Muslims, who were holding the empire on behalf of the Turks and the Moors, who were now retreating back to America, as well as back up into the noble families of Europe. This history that we speak of in terms of your Moorish history is an aspect of the science that's kept from you because of the migration. Yet, when you think about the true navigation of everything, all civilizations that started in the south had an easier transition towards each other based upon the trade winds and the monsoon winds that travel from April to October, and then from October to April, the opposite direction. So this created a cross current for them to just be able to go in and rock and do what they needed. So the ability to transport and travel was already here. All of this was buried during the Reconstructional period, in which so-called Caucasian dominance and the complexion of America changed from the copper-colored races, as spoken of in Webster's Dictionary of 1824, first edition, into what we now perceive as the European complexion, which is, again, paler or so-called Caucasian, which is really a descendant from all of the slaves that were left out or let out of Albion and Russia during the time of the so-called emancipation, and then being put into service of the so-called Union and United States armies as beasts of burden or soldiers, and then promised to be able to rent the land that they killed the people who the land that they were taken from. And then to continue the industry, they still had these Moors under the jurisdiction of chattel who didn't remember or didn't understand that they were free. So those Moors that were free and a part of the original government all took the name free man. That's why in the movie they call him Django Freeman. That was like having ill at the end of your name in the United States. So by law, they had to respect you on a level of equality, even though everybody around you was put under this inhuman bondage based upon them being descendants from those original Moors that agreed to come into the United States to do labor because they would receive more gold in it at the time, when they didn't realize that they was wearing the same gold that they was trying to get more of. Because the white man brought them back into slavery, brought them or enslaved them and put them under the jurisdiction by changing manifests and all of that and renaming places. So Morocco over here, the seat of Morocco, the original Moorish Science Temple was in Montana, under Lake Michigan. You know what I'm saying? They go Indianapolis, Morocco, and then Mohammed. It's like a triangle in that area, out of where Gary and a lot of them places is at. And that's where the Jackson Whites and the people who produced or became Michael Jackson and the Jackson these people came from. All of these were Moors and vanquished dukes of Old York that merged with the so-called Melungians, who were the so-called Egyptians or the Egyptians, who at sometimes was kidnapping children in Mississippi bayous and stuff. They would report my elder, queen of the Choctaw Nation, told me how she would hear stories about how there would be men in turbans and bejeweled outfits and stuff. They would just appear, and then there would be a child. There would be like 2 children or whatever missing. And then years later, when the child would come back, they would come back totally like moored out. Because the story was they was kidnapping nobles and taking them back to what is now Fez and all of that, and educating them in what was really going on, and then bringing them back over here to then be a part of the Moorish movements that was happening, such as the Ahmadiyya and the Umayyad and what became the Canaanite movement and what became the Moorish Science Temple. So historically speaking, you as a Moor having Moorish science is much deeper and goes beyond what the Prophet Noble brought. But what the Prophet did was establish an earthly, vast estate, irrevocable trust, fee simple, absolute, that allows you to function in your true capacity, not just as a Moor. You can't draw power from what you are in third density. You just are that. So being a Moor is essentially what you are. Being a Moor is like saying you were Asiatic. Yet what that invokes is all of the elements that exist within that. You dig? Angelology, Egyptology, ontology, eschatology, psychology, spirituality, spiritualism, mediumship, astrology, astronomy. All of these things go into you being just you. Because you're the only one conscious of every moment that you're in when you're in it, but you're so at peace with it that you allow it to be. Therefore, you always on time and leaving right when you're supposed to, when you're moving in the right direction, in the right spirit, because you're not doing anything wrong. You're not committing a crime by claiming and saying that you are a Moorish American national. And that according to these international documents that's already notarized, that is by a notary that recognizes foreign documents that says that. But then I don't even need a notary. I could just get 3 people to sign it to say that I'm that. You can say what you want. If I got a flag for my own government, I got a constitution, I got a right, I can stand on that in any court in the world and show and prove that I am that. And that I am in amity and have always been in amity, because the United States with Morocco, that's the one treaty they can never break, because if they do, then it's really down. So what they do is that they persecute you in the name of you not being your true self, because you function under the position of trustee of the name that was given to you at birth, that doesn't have an EO or bay at the end of it, that makes you a dead constructive trust until you redeem it as a restate and estate and allow yourself to function in your true person, which then puts them off as the trustee, which means they have all the liability, which means they go to jail. T.D. Jakes ain't telling you about this. Sharpton can't talk about this on CNN. They shoot him in the head live on air. Look at the movie Network. Think I'm lying. They do it every day. Just because somebody's in a strip club dumping up money and all of that, they could do all of that. But if we was to write a letter to them right now and say that you need this and that, see what happens. And you could get it to them directly if you were more, because you register mail. You know how that works. You're your own postmaster. So you make that happen. Somebody got to sign for it. Based upon all of these different things, we have to create the services and the things necessary for our people to function in the right position. So one of the things that we are going to offer through Wheel Moorish Science Temple General Consulate Post is a means for people to post their declarations and proclamations formally and receive an affidavit of publishing verifying the fact that this thing ran for this amount of weeks on this site. And based on the Paperwork and Reduction Act, this is naturally lawful in the idea that you are proclaiming and declaring based upon notice and disclaimer who and what you are. So for whatever you want to do and based upon our position in it, it'll be able to be up there after the 4 weeks if you like. So that way you could always have verification so you can refer somebody back to it so they can read why you are what you are. This is all in the process of truly declaring and understanding your position as a national of the original jurisdiction, the original government that still exists, that has never stopped, that has always had its own provisions and its own citizens prescribed for. Therefore, the preamble where it says, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general, again, welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. So we the people of the United States, that's the preamble citizens, that's us. What that understands is that the preamble to the Constitution of the United States of America shows that the origin comes from a pre-existing nation. You understand? That's the pyramid. That's your Confederate dollar that went void after a certain time. The style under the Articles of Confederation, the style of this confederacy shall be United States of America. You see? Your country. Each state retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence of every power, jurisdiction, and right which is not by this confederation expressly delegated to the United States, comma, in Congress Assembly. You dig? If any person guilty or charged with treason, felony, or other high misdemeanor in any state shall flee from justice and be found in any of the United States, in any of the states of Morocco, he shall, upon demand of the Bey, the governor, or the executive power, the executive of the office of the state from which he fled, be delivered up, and be removed to the state having jurisdiction of his offense. You dig? We went totally in, and it's simple. It's only 5 articles, but we ratified that and made that so. The general rules of practice, again, of birth certificates is that the Register of Titles is authorized to receive for registration of memorial, meaning something gone, upon any outstanding certificate of title, an official birth certificate pertaining to the registered owner, named in said certificate of title, showing the date of birth and said registered owner, providing there is attached to said birth certificate an affidavit of an affiant who states that he/she is familiar with the facts recited, stating that the party named in said birth certificate is the same party as the owners named in the certificate of title. You see? And that, therefore, the Register of Titles shall treat said registered owner as having attained the age of majority at date 18 years after the birth shown by birth certificate. So essentially this means that until you redeem this date with the birth certificate, you are still listed as a dead person, or worse, a minor, somebody that is not competent. You understand? That becomes the de facto aspect of our existence, because the 14th Amendment, like I said, was offered as an offer almost, and was not legal or lawful based upon what we did in terms of walking out. Everything that's happening or has been happening has been functioning based upon the law of necessity, as well as the law of admiralty. So this Jubilo, Jubilah, and Jubilum, these 3 Jews, were the Judas factor or the Judas effect that broke down the actual system of us by actually creating systems where we could keep them out. We fell victim to the same systems by the fact that a lot of us were now under foreign jurisdiction based upon obligations and debt that they had incurred while in the service of these people, of these nobles from these different albionic systems. So based on that,
This is why you see movies where there's a dude, he's in prison, and then there's something that happens, and then they need him to do something. So they either offer him a pardon or they give him a new name or somebody that was there. This is how they're able to do that. This is an old system called statecraft. And in basic proclamation, based upon the system that exists today, proclamation and declaration is that of law by the court once it is done on behalf of an estate or a trust. More Asiatic, you are the living trust and the living beneficiary at the same time. So you correspond to a system where you now are obligated, per se, to act a certain way. But the government itself already knows that. So there was one case where it said, this was Lau versus Arkansas, but said a defendant's apparent ignorance of the law that was in favor of the plaintiff's right does not exempt him from his liability for monetary damages due to his misconduct. The law will protect any individual who, in the prosecution of a right, does everything which the law requires him, but fails to obtain his right by the misconduct or neglect of a public officer. It is a maxim of law, admitting few in any exceptions, that every duty laid upon a public officer for the benefit of a private person is enforceable by judicial process. See? So you have the right by law to exercise your religious practice by annexing your name to your free national, which is not a change, which is actually an annexation or a correction, because it should have had that on it from the beginning. And if somebody gave you a polygraph and you know that this is what it should have been, then you're going to pass. Not saying that you have to do that, but just that's the point. The point is what forefathers were you are today. So as a Moroccan, you've always been that. But a Moroccan, again, is a Moor, and a Moor is an Asiatic. And that means that as a descendant of the Shayut and the Yasani, you are a sheep. See what I'm saying? As well as an emissary that brings forth the word of true and living God, which is arm, leg, arm, head, which is true al-Islam, which was practiced in al-Maghreb, al-Aqsam, al-Sheikh al-Meksam, al-Meksam, al-Amazon. The plaintiff, another one that says, the plaintiff is strictly forbidden by his religious creed to perform a sworn court-ordered name change. And so when you would make men know that sins are washed away by purity in life, a rite symbolically may be introduced. See? That's from the Circle 7 Quran, chapter 6, verse 18. So what that basically means is that once they tell you that you got to get the court-ordered name changed, then you just make sure that somewhere on your paperwork that is safe under duress that you're doing this, and that they are in violation, and you put that on the actual document, which then makes it right by exemption in the fact that you have now completed the action that they need to get you what you want, but at the same time you have not conferred spiritual jurisdiction to them in the action. That's love, truth, peace, freedom, justice, and equality in physical action, which is love, which is God, which is Gumar Arzubar, which is Boaz and Jasim. You see what I'm saying? In the middle pillar, manifesting out of dark through the wormhole that connects it to the direct path of the Ayn. The plaintiff's religious right meets all 5 elements of a legal right: love, truth, peace, freedom, justice. Of a legal right according to the law of jurisprudence and his divine instruction. This right of cleansing is a preparation right, and they who are thus cleansed compromise the temple of purity. Understand? This right of cleansing and this temple are but symbolic of the cleansing of the soul, which does not come from outward show, but is the temple within. See, like this is
You understand what I'm saying? This is why you ain't ever going to hear people say, okay, let us read the Moorish Science Temple Quran in the Pacific Quran in the Baptist Church. You understand? Because this is showing and proving to you that Esau is you, and that the true book is you, and that the temple, Moorish Science Temple, is really you. And that them trying to do that is trying to invade your temple, which is what? Trying to raid your estate, which is illegal, which is punishable by death, and is also punishable by at least 15 years in prison. And this is already shown and proved to you. So let's say they deny you in court. Say, okay, you can't do this. You got to get a court and the name change. Well, then what you got to do? You say, great, give me a denial letter. Let me know who you are, who your superior is. Sign it, have him sign it, give it to me, see you later. Take that, type up or get the affidavit of who and what you are, right, along with the so-called dishonor letter, and go and file it in superior court as a claim against them. Individually, you will win. And in that, you read or you cite when they ask you why are you doing this, it's because these people have infringed upon my religious right based upon this and that, based upon the Circle 7 Quran, which in a sense that you could even recite what I just read. They're going to say, okay, sir, here it is. They're going to give you the stamp, but it's going to be stamped. It's going to say under duress. They can't acknowledge that. Remember, the United States are not transferred titles of nobility, which means they can't deny them either. You got to look at yourself as a godly person of the natural order, which is chaos. So you're not going to come in there like everybody else, but you're going to be unorthodox, orthodox enough, where they're going to have a hint of memory based upon how you act. If you throw the documents in their face, they're going to have a problem with you. The more savage they become, the more light you got to be. Where you always talking them down, where they always feel like the savage. Because they are. But the Masons among them is going to know, especially if you inhabit, meaning that you're in your headdress or regalia or whatever. The thing is, it's establishing everything prior, so that way once anything goes down, you already got things in reference, in play, to be able to shut them down. So if they take it further, then it becomes a situation where now they know that they under total obligation. They're always going to try to use your straw person or the dead constructive trust as the name to go by what they're functioning under. Most of the courts today are not under record. So anytime you go to court, somebody needs to ask that, because that's why they're able to do a lot of the crazy shit they're doing. And if not, then you say that you have this adjourned until you get your own stenographer to come and sit as record. And in the meantime, you can get all your stuff together. Because none of the state governments is under oath no more. That's why the judges been telling them to put their stuff in a private hop. So that way, because they know people are going to be able to come after them individually now. In essence, the state put the liability on them, on the workers now. So this whole so-called mainstream aspect of moral science and movement is great, because it gets people talking about something that's always been there, who and what they really are. Yet you have to understand and navigate what true moral science really would mean. We got enough Barbary pirates on the radio and on the videos today. They literally make records called Pirate and talk about killing you and raping you and selling you and all of that. That's what Barbie pirates do. And they are descended then from those people. You dig what I'm saying? That's why they could be Muslim, but then wear Jesus pieces and all of that. You dig what I mean? And be Israelite or whatever, but then still, deal with all of the foreign nations and all of that. And that's really just due to their position in the world as commodities that are not being dealt through what's called comity. You know what I'm saying? This never-ending drama of different so-called black liberation theologies going at each other and all of that has now reached the end, which was the point of the COINTELPRO. And if you look at the time in which all of these so-called divisive elements started, they were right before or during or after or all at the same time around the time that this dude became president. And I told people on the tape, Welcome to Obamatopia, that this was now going to be the agenda to now break down what the movement was doing. In my opinion, it was the conscious community that got him really elected, because we were the ones who were keeping it real about who and what was going on. And it was a mystical faction that they also fed to do so. But regardless of whatever spin they're going to put on it, those of us that's really doing the work got to really go out there and show and prove, regardless to how they're going to spin it, because it ain't for everybody. And this whole agenda has now become what it is, almost like a minstrel, you know what I'm saying? Which is what most so-called movements like this become, unfortunately, at one point, and then they really start to get their stuff together. So this is the good part, almost, if you will. So the overall creation, like I said, of these people and these things are coming from the fact that most of these so-called countries or so-called states are being bought of and based upon so-called descendants. But remember, the word descendant means dead. You know what I mean? So you could have living relatives who are your descendants, meaning that they're mentally dead, but they absent of themselves, right? So based on their system of peerage, they depict that all descendants of Adam are Caucasian, right? So here in America, the word Caucasian means so-called white, right? But that's not what it means. In Russia, it means a Moor, a black person. In India, it means like a Hindu. You know what I'm saying? From the north. To the 5%, a Caucasian is a Caucasus Asian or Caucasus Asiatic, which is a Moor, specifically of the Turkish origin, meaning of the pseudo-barbarous aspect that lends to the rougher side of things, right? So the Caucasian really means Caucasus Asian, which specifically then would be Moroccan or Moor, who is Caucasus, meaning a group apart, or cussed or cursed, which is then denationalized. Asian then is also Asiatic, coming from Aish, A-Y-S-H, where we get Moorish from, or Asia. The Moorish Temple then is a bastard state trust, you see what I'm saying, in which that the Free National of the United States is also the beneficiary once the Declaration of Nationality is proclaimed. Therefore, based on them, all Caucasian, when they say all descendants of Noah are Caucasian, they're saying that all descendants of Noah are the original Caucasus Asian. You know what I'm saying? The original Moors, the original people. Not what we perceive as white people or whatever that means to you today. But check this. But an African woman, meaning a denationalized Moabite queen, descendant of Ruth, was grafted in which is then the Yaqub thing. After the Africans then adopted the Jesuit-created Muslim religion, this was the creation of the so-called Muslim religion and empire that came out of the Moabite or Al-Moroccan Empire between 836 and 1196 BC, which translates to 1416 to 1776 BC, right? AD. This is where the Jesuit aspect of it came in, going all the way back to Hugh de Payon and Salah ad-Din, peace be upon him. The Moors who fortified their Islamic, Noahidic, or Noahidic Moorish heritage abandoned their estates, just like Esau did centuries before. This was during the time of Hammurabi's day, with the birth of the Islamic Babylonian religion mystery system, which was ordained by the last Moabite queen, Hagar-Il. This was, like I said, during the period of 836 to 1196. So based on these Gregorian years, these are the years that led to the fall of the Al-Moroccan Empire, the rise of the so-called Islamic religionified empires, right? As well as the so-called freedom of the United States that was now functioning under the capacity of America, which was really Al-Morocc, to the rest of the world. Therefore, the United States did not exist as a country until it had the capital to produce something to be recognized by Morocco that then offered to sponsor it to the rest of the Moorish republics so that way these white people wouldn't be enslaved like everybody else was being enslaved at the time. So what this is showing you again is that based upon their understanding of descendantship and what was going on, if you perceive the Caucasian as being white and you as a black person, a descendant of the Al-Moroccan Empire, a Moor, an Asiatic, marry somebody who is so-called African, which really, in this case, would then mean Negro, which then would also mean denationalized Moor, which then also means WIGHT people, right? White people, the homesteaders, the pilgrims, the Puritans, the immigrants, these people. Then that means that you, as the Moabite queen or the Moorish king, are abandoning your estate because you are now dwelling in a nation that is not a part of the Noahidic law. You're from a Gentile nation. The Gentile nations were the nations that dealt with the amalgamation of the Caucasian or the Neanderthal into the bloodline of the overall people. Therefore, you've disinherited yourself the way Esau did with Yaqub. See what I'm saying? So the lands of Al-Maghreb, Al-Aqsam, Al-Sheikh, Al-Mexam, Al-Amazon, which is the Societas Republicae y Al-Americanos Estados, which was also the Temuancan Empire, which consists of the Olmec, Maya, Inca, Aztec, Zapotec, and then finally the Toltec, which was the waning of everything. They represent the Jaredites in the Bible. And so the Uaxita or the Uixita nations that became the Uaxitan, which became the Uaxan, which became the Washan, which became the Washo, which became the Washita, which became the Washita, right? They now represented the original so-called autochthonous Moorish class that were now not using their true national names as part of the original government, but were now exalting their tribal names as their free national names, which is why the so-called United States could try to exterminate them and get rid of them, because these names were not the names of the original people that was set aside based upon them being the original Caucasus Asian, right? White people who occupied the government, who ruled over them, who were now denationalized and being shipped down south under the term Negro. Mississippi is listed as the Atlantic Ocean. They listed as Africans. They get down. They now given a fake history, now lumped in with other so-called Africans that's imported from somewhere else with prisoners of war who don't know what's going on, and now they all being told that they slaves and all this, and they being shipped out and being seeing people tortured and brutalized, and now falling in line and then starting to believe that, and wind up having a woman who probably has grown up in that plantation or in that place to understand that. Now there's a whole generation of people who have now adopted this way of life, and now for the next 84 years, they're going to live like that and treat them like that's what's reality. And then that now shapes or reshapes what America is abroad. So the Social Security account creates the slave number for those people who abandon their estates and cannot have an estate, like anyone born or descended from a Moor, a Hindu, or an Asian. So these are people who had the original states of the old empire. Right? This is what we talked about with the Sikhs. But these dudes was just bugging that we was just in habit. He, brother we was with had feathers out of his braids, and then I had, like I said, the headdress on, and Morsey had the cowboy boots on. You know what I'm saying? The queen was regaled out. So, and then we went to this spot that was like a rainforest like thing where they had a giant Inca head and all of that. It was like, you know what I'm saying? So it was all as it was supposed to be. So, more Hindu, Asian, or African who is not a former slave descent or former enslaved descent. We were never slaves, we were enslaved. So enslaved descendants, which is what we were, as well as POWs, we were then undeclared. So under the 14th Amendment, the Ecclesiastical Trust that was sponsored by the Vatican, a civilly dead host, which was the stateless person, the dead non-Caucasian European, was now the descendant, again, of the dead people, the people declared legally dead, true landowners, and cannot intermarry, and therefore cannot intermarry and inherit the function of the executive and executive office. Meaning the Moors from Albion in Europa and their slaves could not be a part of the original estate. Because once a Moor of this place abandoned their estate now went in trust of the original government. The original government was now under the protection of the so-called United States that was now supposed to hold it in trust until we reorganized ourselves and reconstituted at Philadelphia. That never happened because the chattel slavery thing was set up. And then you had undeclared Moors that started working with the United States forcibly and unforcibly to do so, like Peter the Negro, who brought Columbus over here, and Estebanco and these type of Moors. They didn't make them necessarily wanted to do it, but all these other niggas was selling out, and the people that they was doing it to was really looked like them, but they was lighter skinned and spoke a different language and wore more armor and whatever, and they was dealing with titles, contract, which was foreign to this over here. Just as foreign as oranges was to over there until we brought it over there. But they wasn't called oranges, they was called naranja or naranj. So therefore, again, undeclared Moors under the 14th Amendment sets the Ecclesiastical Trust, which is a civilly dead host, stateless person, which is a dead person. Therefore, non-Caucasian Europeans that were put in that position to represent that 14th Amendment citizenship through naturalization have now cannot intermarry and inherit or function in the executive office because they have put themselves under the perpetual 14th Amendment citizenship until they have declared or that they're not that. But then if they do that based upon the penalties of going against themselves as being U.S. citizens, they can then be put in jail. See what I'm saying, how they flip you? So the non-Caucasian European descendant people cannot intermarry and inherit in the function of the executive office, but due to knowledge to that. Non-Caucasian European descendant people, meaning non-Caucasian Asiatics from Europa, cannot marry and inherit or function in the executive or the executive office. That's why they had to bleed and bleach into the family to create a system where they could function as you and make you the trustee of your own name. Therefore, all of this is basically done under kidnapping, you see what I'm saying, human trafficking, and everything else that they put regular people in jail for.
So the only way out, in my opinion, is the declaration of such, to declare to the present body of who is to what you are, which is why we're offering the We Are Moorists on Temple General Post site for your proclamations and declarations for a reasonable fee and providing the affidavit of publishing for you to then, take your verification or credential verification into the next level. And based upon the Paperwork and Reduction Act, this is perfectly an exhibit warrant, especially being the fact that a notary will be provided for you in the process of that amendment on the 100% kind of paper. So, like I said, the will and testament, which is the declaration of the intentions and what he wills to be and perform, you are the one that manifests that. Once that is brought forth, in a sense, you establish your estate. You now can function in your true capacity without having to deal with a lot of the bureaucracy stuff that people are telling you that you got to deal with to make things happen. The Kingdom of Hawaii didn't file the UCC until they was filing the UCC against the whole United States for their money, and they got it. So, as Generalissimo or Generalissimos, we're the ones that are supposed to understand the difference between the true ills and days and the citizens that are listed as human capital, i.e. property improvement on UCC documents that made over $14.3 trillion for the United States last year. So your argument and your position as executive is also coming from your position as the remnant and the descendant of one of the delegates that walked out of the session in 1861, based upon what you and we perceive as the North trying to impose this position on us, in which now the so-called position in Europe where they were using puppet princes to run things while the true Moors are made the servants in their own house. And we wasn't with that. So when we seen them flipping that on us, that's when we started to point our own white boys who was dealing with their own forms of slavery, and these Negroes that was important, that was miseducated already under this fictitious system, that was now fighting for the same people that was putting them under bondage. That's why we say that the true Civil War started amongst the Cherokees in 1854 with John Drew as the Confederate Cherokee, father of Noble Joe Ali, born on the Cherokee Reservation in Sampson, North Carolina. This is, so you see what I'm saying? This is beyond black history, what we're talking about. This is Earth history. This is global history that these white people and these black people been concealing from everybody, the whites, the blacks, the Asians, and everybody else. Because to get into the true aspect of America and the true intent, the spirit of 76, who and what that is, the Moors, the real people that they talk about in the tomb of the unknown soldier. That's us, man. That ain't them. We died so that way, our ancestors died so that way, not only could we be free, but this place be a place where people could come from all over the world and be free and be under the tutelage of the Universal Principles of Science and Law and Government that they burned down and turned into the White House after the War of 1812. Get the book Frenchified Indians and something else. Get another book called Confederate Yankees or Black Confederate Yankees. Another book called Black Masters, White Slaves. There's more of them than the opposite. There are more black people owning everybody else than everybody else owning black people at a point. And it had to switch based upon the illegitimacy of human bondage and the elevation of people that may not have been ready to be attributed as human. They make movies every day showing you how they're not human and how they're not You know what I'm saying? They vampires and everything else and something inside them that's not real. That's coming from somewhere. And because they'll only put out aspects of the Yakut, they are not really built on the reality. We tend to just, take it aside and not really do the knowledge to it. But get the theology of time, man. Get that book, man. Get the Circle 7 Quran, read that thing, man. Read the problem book if you got it, which is the lessons of Planet 13X. You know what I'm saying? Read that. Read the Mental Nectar by, Ra Alpha, because these are books written by modern Moors of our ilk, of our generation, Othello's Children in the New World by Jose Clemente Bay. These are nobles of our generation that's putting down what's really going down. And it's our position to take that further by creating the service platform for us to be able to function as a true nation. But that can't happen if we are constantly debating on what type of nation we're going to be. So my suggestion is everybody that want to be or more and all of that and really want to do it right or do what is perceived as correct, right and exact, holler at your boy, houseofl@hotmail.com, you know what I'm saying? And we can definitely send you the invoice so that way you can send that back to us. And if you have more time stuff with General Post or document, and then give you the website and all of that. You can tell everybody to check it out. And anybody else that wants to post anything of relevancy, again, of national interest, birthright, inheritance, you can do so for a very nominal fee. That, again, goes back to the upliftment now and the erection of Moorish Science Temple 2A, of which I'll be the chairman of out here. Anybody else that wants to holler at us about the upcoming class this week about estate planning specifically, you can hit us up at houseofl@hotmail.com. You could also hit us up on Facebook at Aseer Ali Cordoba. And everybody else, you can also check out the Dark Skull 418, www.darkskull418.com. Also check out www.cookingmorewithless.com. Also check out www.sagaassad.com. And again, we thank you all for coming through and blessing us with the presence and allowing us to continue this. Thank you again, everybody from last week that were great hosts to us. Peace to the fellowship, peace to Daniel, peace to everybody else that was supportive. And again, love and light to all of the ancestors for blessing us at this point in time, because we don't have to be here and we don't have to be into this, but there's something about who we are that needs to be. So, again, we want to always be right and exact. We want to start a new process of ending the show with the Moorish prayer. So, Allah, creator of the universe, Father of love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice, Allah is my protector, my guide, and my salvation, by night and by day, through his holy prophet, Noble Jew Ali. Amen. So, love and light to you. Love, truth, peace, freedom, justice, equality, isonomy, and inshallah, we'll next week. If you have any more questions about any things we built on tonight, as well as the proclamations, declarations, we'll send you an invoice for that. Email us at houseofl@hotmail.com. Anybody wish to send donations, you could also send to PayPal at dukeoftears@gmail.com, TIERS. Also check out our Kickstarter page for the Dark Skull 418 under Kickstarter Dark Skull 418 under Aseer Ali Allah, Aseer the Duke of Tears. So with you, love and light, peace.